So we're going to finish chapter 23 now about Samuel Adams. Beginning reading on page 115. The revolution had begun. When the cries for independence were heard in faraway England, many thought they were cries of treason. Samuel Adams and John Hancock, as the leaders of the colonists, were identified as traitors. So let's put that under what's going on during history in his time. So Samuel Adams and John Hancock declared traitors. You can be writing right now while I'm writing so that you can keep up. Samuel Adams and John Hancock. So if you're just learning cursive, you don't have to use cursive capitals. They're hard, some of them. Declared traitors by England. Declared traitors by England. Traitor is somebody who turns against their country. Continuing, pause the video if you need to have time to write. Continuing reading. Orders were given for the two men to be captured by the British troops and tried as traitors. In April of 1775, right here, the British soldiers prepared for a surprise raid. The soldiers had orders to capture Hancock and Adams. They were also looking for the food and ammunition stored by the colonists. When the soldiers marched out of Boston, Samuel Adams and John Hancock were in the home of a Patriot pastor, Reverend Jonas Clark, in Lexington. You remember the first battle of the Revolutionary War was in Lexington and Concord, two cities that were really close together. Paul Revere made his famous ride to warn the colonists that the British were coming. As the British soldiers arrived in Lexington, Adams and Hancock escaped to the nearby village of Woburn. Their safety was regarded as of utmost importance by the colonists. Stop there. Stop reading for a second. Why do you think the safety of these two men was so important? Because they were the leaders in thinking in those days of what our country needed to become and what we needed to go through to get there. If they had been captured or killed, our country might have fallen apart and never been able to hold up and resist the English, the British, until we finally won. Continuing in the book. While they traveled through the fields, Adams rejoiced as he considered the possibility of events which would bring his country's independence. He exclaimed, "Oh, what a glorious morning is this!" So somebody who was with him actually heard him say that, wrote it down somewhere, and we still have whatever that writing was that tells us he said that. You know what? I'm going to look in the back of the book. The very last pages are the notes of where all these quotes come from. Number 69 is a book by a man named William Wells called The Life and Public Services of Samuel Adams, written in 1865. That's 150 years ago. Wow. And he must have talked to somebody or read a letter or something, somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who heard him say that way back in 1776. So was Samuel Adams afraid? Was he worried that he was going to get captured? No, he had no fear of the British troops that were sent to capture him. Probably because he knew that God would care for him. And if something did happen to him, he knew that God had a plan for that too. So he had no fear of British troops sent to capture him. Are you writing this down? Continuing the book. The United States of America declared her independence in 1776. At last, Samuel Adams saw the results for which he had worked and waited all those years. He had labored without wavering for the cause of independence. Now, it wasn't over. We hadn't won the war yet, but America had come to the point where she was ready to say, this is it. We need to be separate from England. So let's put that on our chart over here under contributions. When America declared her independence in 1776, I'm going to write it. All right, you can write that down. This part came out a little bit light. Go ahead and start writing. Here's your next thing under contributions. Please make sure you're in the right column. Let's go on and read the last section. Pause the video if you need time to write this down. Pause it. There you go. There's a pause spot when I'm not in the way. Here we go. Massachusetts had led the 13 colonies during the years prior to the Revolution, with Boston leading Massachusetts. Samuel Adams was at the helm, that means at the steering wheel of the ship, leading the Patriots in Boston. Samuel Adams had written, debated, and declared his position. God had used his faithful labor to lead men. He was not a man who would lead armies, but a man who would lead in the ideas which became the basis of the new nation. Let me stop here for just a minute. So men were the ones who were making the decisions at this point. Ladies, we didn't have a vote. But do you think we really didn't have a vote? Don't you think these men listened to their wives if they were godly husbands? Don't you think that God speaks to the wives too, and the men would look for their wives' wisdom? I bet a lot of discussions went on around the dinner tables in the colonies between the husbands and the wives, and even the older children, as they had thoughts about all this, because some of these boys who were 16 and 17 and 18 would be the ones to go out and fight, as well as the dads. So I'm sure these families really considered this very, very deeply and talked about it a lot. And so the women had just as much of a say in what was happening as the men did through their loving and godly husbands. So just think about that when people talk to you about women's rights. Yeah, okay, let's keep going. Those who knew him best wrote of his character and contribution. I think a lot of this is going to be a repetition of what we've already written down, but this is in the words of people who actually knew him. John Adams, Samuel's cousin, the one who became the second president of the United States after George Washington, wrote of his cousin, in his common appearance, that means he didn't look like a superstar or a movie star or anything fancy. In his common appearance, he was a plain, simple, decent citizen of middling stature, dress, and manners. So he wasn't tall and he wasn't short, he was just kind of an average guy. He had an exquisite ear for music, he really was good at it, and a charming voice when he pleased to exert it. So he could sing nicely when he chose to sing for people. Yet his ordinary speeches in town meetings, in the House of Representatives, and in Congress exhibited nothing extraordinary. But upon great occasions, when his deeper feelings were excited, he erected himself. That means he stood up a little taller. or rather nature seemed to make him taller, without the smallest symptom of affection, into which an upright dignity of figure and gesture, into an upright, that's a hard one to read, into an upright dignity of figure and gesture, and gave a harmony to his voice which made a strong impression on spectators and auditors, people watching and people listening. The more lasting for the purity, correctness, and nervous elegance of his style. So usually he was just kind of a regular guy, and he would just talk to you kind of like a regular guy, but if he got really passionate about something, he felt really strongly about something, or he was really feeling the injustice of something, he would seem to become taller, and his voice would be a voice that everyone loved to listen to as he spoke of the greatness of this country that we could have if we were independent. So going on, Thomas Jefferson, who's he? He was one of the first presidents also, wrote of him, Mr. Samuel Adams was so rigorously logical. That means everything he said made a lot of sense based on information that he had. So clear in his views, abundant in good sense, and master always of his subject. So he knew what he was talking about. He didn't just sort of talk and not know what he was talking about. That he commanded the most profound attention whenever he rose in an assembly. So when he stood up to speak, everybody would go, hey, Adams is talking. Shh, listen. He's going to say something amazing. He always does. And they would listen to him. Continuing. The years following the Declaration of Independence were busy years for Samuel Adams as he continued to give his energy and time for the cause of his country. Adams signed the Declaration of Independence, served as a member of the First and Second Continental Congresses, and was elected governor of Massachusetts. So let's write those things down as his contributions if you have room. Actually, I think we'll just put signed the Declaration of Independence and was governor of Massachusetts. Those are two more of his contributions to the country. He served in helping write this Declaration of Independence and signing it, and later he was governor of Massachusetts. He was also part of both Continental Congresses, the two meetings where they decided what to do about this problem with England. But we couldn't fit it all in our paper. So, continuing the last paragraph of the book, or of the chapter, history remembers him best for his unselfish, unwavering efforts to lead America to declare her independence. His title, Father of the American Revolution, was earned at great personal sacrifice and was justly given to honor a man who knew that all liberty comes from the King of Kings and is the right of each individual. That's the end of what we have about Samuel Adams. I would like to find a book of his life that we can read out loud in class when you all come back.